once we got in the car, he fixated on Michael and he kept asking Michael, "So, Michael, are you married? What do you mean? You're in your 50s and well, are you interested? Do you have a wife?" And he just didn't get it, and he ignored me, and it was just so ironic because I'd been the one like, "No, no, no, let's not tell him we're gay," and Michael's like, "I want to come out," and I'm saying, "No, no, no, stay in the closet," and yet he's just fixated on Michael.
Well, I wanted to come out beforehand.
Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today we have with us a couple of travel writers, Brent and Michael. From Brent and Michael Are Going Places, which is a travel blog talking about digital nomad lifestyle and LGBTQ travel. Hi guys, welcome to the show.
Hi Rex, thanks for having us.
Hello, nice to meet you.
Yep, nice to meet you guys. Great to have you guys on because there's a lot of stuff that I actually want to talk about with you guys, especially like looking at your travel blog and this column that you guys actually write in the LGBTQ Nation website, right? There's a lot of interesting articles that I think pokes at very controversial topics about gay travel, about digital nomad life, about the cost of like Westerners going to developing countries and stuff like that. So I really love it that you guys are actually touching on it and sharing your opinions on it, right? So before we begin, let's start with an introduction of you guys first, because I know you guys are writers, but the travel blog is not actually the main or where you guys started. Like you guys are actually writing novels and are screenwriters, right? Give us a bit of an introduction and background of yourselves.
Well, it's funny. I've been a writer for, I guess, ever since I graduated from college, so 30 years. And I think these days you sort of have to be diverse. I do travel writing. We do our Substack newsletter. But I also write novels and screenplays. And it's been great. It's really worked with the nomad thing because, obviously you can write anywhere. And when we were living in Seattle at one point, we realized, gosh, we're living in one of the most expensive cities on earth, and we don't necessarily have one of the highest paying careers. So it really worked out well for us.
Yeah, I mostly do the travel news writing these days. I've written a couple of novels in the past, but once we started traveling and we started the Substack newsletter, that really became the focus of what I do. And the travel photography, I love that as well.
It is interesting. You mentioned the whole digital nomading phenomenon. It's just exploded. We started this 5 years ago. And I know that there was obviously people doing this prior to this when we started doing it. But I think the thing that has made it easy for everybody to travel, which is social media and all the, the cyber world, has also made it easier for people to weigh in on what's happening. So there is a really interesting, sometimes frustrating, but really interesting debate about all these issues about over-tourism and about,
sorry about that, Rex.
No worries.
Gay travel. Oh, I'm sorry. We dropped the microphone. There's just all these things that are going on, and it feels like the speed of the debate is happening faster than ever, in part because of social media. But it is, I agree, it's really interesting, everything that's happening.
Yeah, I mean, this is the expansion of social media. I was talking to another guest like just a few days ago in another recording, and we were talking about how the publication of about travel and also about opinion has changed throughout the years. Because he used to be a book publisher, which is almost like similar to you guys when you started writing like novels and stuff. And then now the distribution of content is very much digital, right? And that also allows people to voice their opinions and of course reach a wider audience way easier than in the past, right? So touching back on 2018 was when you guys first started the basically digital nomad lifestyle, right? I would love to know like what got you guys started. Like why do you decide to do it in 2018 and you guys sold your house and everything, in fact, to embark on the journey. So what triggered that change in lifestyle?
Well, we'd always been interested in travel, and we'd always thought we would do more long-term travel when we got a little bit older. But really what set us off on becoming digital nomads was the election of Donald Trump. The night he got elected, we were at a very depressing election party that broke up very early. And as we were heading home, literally on the car on the freeway back to our place in Seattle, Brent looked at me and said, "I think we should sell the house and leave the country. This isn't working for us anymore. Let's get the heck out of here." And I thought about it for a second, and I'd lived overseas before, and I love travel. Very easy for me to say, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. And we told our friends we were going to do it. And a lot of people were blowing off steam after Trump got elected. And I think our friends thought we were not really serious about it. We were just sort of venting. But 6 weeks later, we'd sold our house and we moved into an apartment.
But it speaks to how quickly the world has changed on the whole digital nomad thing. So this would have been 2016, and then 2017 we were preparing. And we had sort of a vague vision of what we wanted to do. It's like, well, we will travel, we'll live in different cities, we'll continue to work, but we didn't really have a term for it, and we didn't really know how it would work. I guess we were going to stay in hotels, we were going to stay in Airbnbs, we were going to be lonely, was it going to be expensive? And then, a couple months into our research, we saw this term, digital nomad, and Michael said, Brent, I think this is what we're going to do, this thing called, and so it was weird to finally have a term for what this thing we were doing, but it was also really good because it sort of demystified the whole thing. It's like, oh, well, if other people are doing this, it can't be that scary. And then just in the 5 years, as I sort of mentioned before, it's become just this huge phenomenon, and it feels like it's just going to, in the years ahead, it's just going to get, it's become an even bigger and bigger deal.
Yeah, I mean, back when I started, that this term also wasn't like as big as it is now, because like I don't think in the past anyone ever said like, hey, I want to be a digital nomad. Whereas today you go to any of the groups and the very common question that people are asking is, oh, I want to become a digital nomad, I want to lead this lifestyle. How do I become a digital nomad? And all the old school nomads will always tell you that this is not like, you don't actually become a digital nomad, you just get a freaking remote job and then just go and travel. Because that was the initial kind of purpose that any of us started with, right? Like we just wanted to see the world and we had something that we can take along the way and just do it, right? But it sounds like when you guys did it, it was pretty fast. I mean, like you guys sold your house in 6 weeks.
We did, but we had to, so my father is elderly and it took some time to move him into, the plan was to move him into assisted living and that took some time. So we had some personal issues to deal with. So it took us almost a year in order to get everything ready. And then we left at the end of 2017. That's when we finally did it. I also thought, again, at the time, I thought it was this big, mysterious, scary thing. Now I think you could prepare, you could do it in 3 months, maybe 6 months, at the long end. But, you have to move everything into the cloud. You have to move your things into mini stores, figure out what you're going to do. You have to, make plans and preparations and maybe mentally adjust too. That's part of the process too.
Right. And when you guys started, where was the first place that you guys go? What was the first country that you moved to?
Well, ironically, our first country was the United States. We were planning on heading out in the summer of 2018, but I got fed up with the weather in Seattle. That's where we were originally from. And we had a terrible winter. We had a winter where it literally rained 100 days in a row. It was just miserable, and I just was over it. And that original article I read where we saw the term digital nomad had mentioned a co-living place in Miami called Rome that sounded fantastic. So that morning, Brent got up and I looked at him. I said, I think we should leave earlier, and here's where we can start this. And it turned out to be sort of like getting in the shallow end of the pool. It turned out to be a great way to do it because we moved all the way on the other side of the country and we were a much warmer climate than we'd been in. So it did feel like we were living somewhere new. But more importantly, Rome, which unfortunately no longer exists at this point, was a wonderful co-living facility. It was for digital nomads. It was a great welcoming way to get into the community and start to meet people. And we started to learn so much about, the digital nomad circuit and the different ways of doing it and the places to go. So Miami was our first stop.
And we were there for 3 months, which was great. Michael said it was great. And then we moved to Malta for a few months. Then we went to Italy. Then we went to Bulgaria. And then we were sort of off and running. And we've lived in Vietnam and Thailand and Switzerland and Georgia. And this
goes on and on
and on and on and on. Yeah.
Nice. You guys brought up a very good point in the sense that, and this is something I always tell a lot of people who are trying to start the journey, is that you don't have to go to the other half of the world, all the way around the world to start. If you are really not confident of your ability to travel, or even if you just want to test run, like how does it feel to take your work on the road, right? Are you able to maintain the discipline? Going somewhere near you is actually a very good option to just slowly, get adjusted to it. And you can work out like some of the kinks that you might realize when you first start. And then you can go back home to maybe make a second preparation before you take a bigger trip. I think that's like a very good example of like, how to just get started like in an easy way. There's no criteria to say that you have to go all the way around the world. There's no criteria to say that you have to go for a whole year at once. You could just start with like a week, a few months, whatever is comfortable.
There are two parts to it. There's figuring out, life as a digital nomad, keeping everything, in the cloud and in your backpack and dealing with all of that. And how do you avoid being lonely? And then there's also the question of living in cultures and countries that you might not be familiar with. And they're two different skills. And rather than do them both at the same time, it's not a bad idea to do the digital nomad part first and then, we had a British friend who his first stop was Istanbul, Turkey. And, for a Westerner, I love Istanbul. It's one of my favorite cities in the world, but it is a more difficult country for somebody who's coming from a Western background. And it probably wasn't, it sort of scared him because he had to deal with all the nomading details. And he also had to deal with just the fact of being in a different culture. And that's not, I wouldn't recommend that.
If you go to the Grand Bazaar of Istanbul, you'll be like, holy shit, like everyone is screaming at me. And especially if it's British, I can totally imagine like that's like a walking dollar, walking pound, walking through the Grand Bazaar.
Right. But after you've been a few places, then you learn to roll with the punches, and it's like, oh, this is just a culture, and it becomes okay. Yeah.
And when you guys made the move, right, what was the biggest challenge of making the move looking back? Like, what was the hardest thing that might actually be the hardest thing, or might just be mentally you thought that it was the hardest thing, but now looking back, you're like, it was actually nothing?
I do remember thinking, I've always sort of rolled my eyes at the whole notion of sort of simple living. They're saying that the more you give away, the less you have, the more free you feel. And I've always thought, well, no, I mean, things make you feel comfortable. A house makes you feel comfortable. And so I did think that was going to be a big challenge. Literally, everything you own, you carry in your backpack. But very quickly, I realized, oh, wow, all these people, I've had friends who've lived in monasteries for months, and they, it changes their life and it changes their perspective. And it's like, oh, there is some ancient wisdom here, because, your life sort of is literally in balance, and that when you get something new, you have to get rid of something old, and you realize how possessions actually don't make you happy and they don't make you feel secure. It's sort of people and circumstances that make you feel secure. And in fact, physical things can make you feel way down, and they give you responsibility, and you're responsible for all these things. And I thought that was going to be a big shift, and it wasn't. I was pleasantly surprised. What about you?
Well, ironically, I don't think there was anything that was hard for us. We weren't in Miami. We were in Miami less than a month when we looked at each other one morning and said, I think this might be the smartest thing we ever did. So that there wasn't anything looking back that was really hard. I think what was looking back at that first year, what was really interesting is that we had planned that first year out pretty in depth, and we were supposed to be going to London and some other bigger name cities, but our plans quickly fell apart because a place went out of business. And what we realized that first year was that we wound up running out of Schengen zone time. So we wound up going to Bulgaria, which was a country we'd never considered living in. And at that point, we realized we really needed to expand our horizons of what sort of countries would be good to live in, because we had an amazing time in Bulgaria. And once we were in Bulgaria, we stopped thinking that London and Paris and Rome were the places you need to go as digital nomads, and started thinking, no, Bulgaria and Tbilisi, Georgia, and frankly, the Balkans, where we spent much of this year, are just as great, if not better, than some of the more typical travel destinations.
I think most people think of what we do, the only peg they have to hang it on is being on vacation or being on holiday. And so they think that our life, we're forever on vacation. And we have found that our best experiences, I mean, we love going to London or Rome or Paris or whatnot, but we go there as tourists. That's not where we tend to live. And we have found that when you're outside of a tourist center, people are so much more hospitable, so much more welcoming. Of course, people in the tourist areas are sick of tourists, and that's their job. But when you go outside of that, we have found that people are usually, local people are really sort of flattered that you've chosen to live amongst them, and they want to share their, especially if you meet them more than halfway. If you meet them halfway and you express enthusiasm for the place where you're visiting, if you're acting like a visitor, like a guest, and not acting all entitled like a jerk and expecting everything to be the way you want it, if you make that, if you meet them halfway, then people are just so generous. And so we have found that experience, I mean, for example, we were in Italy earlier this year, and Italy's wonderful, but they're very, very jaded when it comes to tourists. Now living in the Balkans, living in Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Montenegro and Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, they're just so grateful that you've come to their country, and it's a completely different vibe. And honestly, I think I like it better.
Yeah, I definitely reckon that the Balkans is highly underrated. It's often always overshadowed by the Western counterparts that people keep talking about, which is like your Paris, Rome, and whatever. I think those places are nice, like it's good to go to, but it's so saturated now that anytime you go, even during the winter, it's just super duper crowded. Like I just don't like it. Especially at those places, especially during peak seasons. That's just crazy, right?
Oh my gosh.
I definitely want to get back to this point about the things you guys because you started touching on what you guys assume at the start, and then throughout the years you learn, right? But there's one thing I need to get back to, because I'm curious myself, and I assume a lot of people who wants to transit into the lifestyle will be curious about. Is that why do you guys decide to sell the house and sell everything instead of saying, I don't know, maybe just leave the house there, or like let's just rent it out and then let's just go off by packing, because that seems to be a way easier option compared to saying, let's make this big move and just sell off like one of our biggest asset, right? What was the consideration, and why do you guys choose to go that route?
We really went back and forth. Should we keep the house and rent it out? And we were looking at it from a financial point of view. And finally, we asked our financial advisor, and he said, there are costs in maintaining a house, and you have to, in order to break even, you rent a house for this amount of money. And it really doesn't matter financially. Selling a house, you'll have the money and then you'll invest that money. Or if you keep the house and you rent it out. And we thought about it and we finally decided, wow, maintaining a rental sounds stressful. On some subconscious level, I think we wanted to simplify our lives. Don't you think?
I was more reluctant to sell the house than Brent was. I really liked our house. I really liked Seattle. In hindsight, I'm so grateful that we sold the house and got rid of that sort of complicating stuff. Our life has become much less stressful than it used to be in the United States. And having a house where you have to worry about making sure it's rented and then dealing with any rental problems or paying somebody to do it is a stress that we don't have. And I'm really grateful that we don't have. And the other side to that coin is that we wanted to exit the United States. I mean, with the election of Trump and as nasty and ugly as everything was getting, and we were very passionate about the election. I mean, we were very involved in social media and trying to get Hillary elected, and it was a cause we cared about. And so when Trump got elected and things just continued to get nastier and nastier, we just wanted out. And cutting that cord made it easier to sort of disassociate from the country and not feel like we were drawn back. And we really don't have any intentions of moving back to the U.S. at this point.
But it's interesting, your question, you comparing what we thought then to what we think now, we were simultaneously extremely naive, but also we had some sort of weird foresight that I guess we knew what we wanted because we really cut the cord. And it seems kind of bold. Looking back, it's like, wow, we really did cut the cord. And I'd love to talk to myself because it was a big risk. But I guess on one hand, I don't know, I've always been sort of a control freak, which is ironic. But then what was happening in America felt so out of control. And I realized, well, I can't control this. This is out of my control, but I can still control what I do, where I live, how I live. And so I found it incredibly empowering. And I found even for a control freak, being a digital nomad gave me way more control than being, quote, stable in a house in the United States that felt out of control. So psychologically for me, I guess, it really was easy. My fear of what was going on in America exceeded my fear of the unknown on some level, I guess maybe even unconsciously. But Michael's right. At this point, I mean, I don't like it when people dress up their lifestyle and say, they have access to some, great mystical wisdom. I mean, everybody has a life and everybody's life is valuable. But for us personally, this has turned out to be just fantastic. And it answered all these questions that we had in the decades before we left. All these things that, we never really fit in America for a lot of different reasons. I think we were sort of born to do this. And on some unconscious level, we knew that. And we knew really, really quickly that we had made the right choice. But it's interesting, because, life is a series of experiments, trial and error. And this is really, I've often said everything in life has pros and cons. But for me, nomading, I keep thinking, well, what is the con? Well, okay, I guess occasionally we have bad beds. Sometimes, we have bad travel days. We have awkward experiences and cultures. But the cons are so, for me personally, they're so small compared to what we've gained, which is access to all these different cultures and cuisines and new friends all over the world and a constantly ever-changing smorgasbord of experiences. So it's been really positive for both of us.
That's amazing, because I think one of the points you touch on that I might side topic a bit, but this is something I'm really passionate about, is the idea that the only thing you can really control is within yourself. It's the mindset and the thoughts you take about a certain thing, right? And there's probably a controversial opinion that I always have is that, and I understand that I say this from a bit of a position of privilege, because when I travel, I often see protests, right, in the streets, like a lot of people protesting. I was caught up in one of the biggest ones in Santiago a few years back. Mm-hmm. And the way I see it is just that, yes, people are not happy with the government. So what they did do is that they go out and they spend their days protesting, hoping to effect a change that requires someone to take action. And I always feel like, to me, I don't think that's a very effective method, in the sense of like, if I just want to look at my own life, are there any things that I can do by myself that can make the change that I want in my life? So I don't have to spend time and years waiting for someone to make the change to make my life better or to make my life the way I want it. And I think that is a very important thought to have, like when you start thinking about things like this. But of course, I know that there are people who are not as free in terms of being able to move around, and those things still make sense. And I do reckon that they exist for a reason. But it's just that I always feel sometimes when you point your thumb at yourself first before pointing your fingers at others as a start, that might be a better way to approach certain issues that you find within your own space. You'll be like, what can I do to make the change that I want, rather than saying, how can I make others change to what I want? And that gives you a lot of power in your own hands.
I completely agree. And I mean, the whole topic of privilege, I agree that too. There's a lot of criticism about nomading, that it's cultural imperialism and it's privilege. And I completely concede the privilege. But I've also found that when I don't know how you can be a human being and travel the world, and if your heart is open at all, not be moved and touched by the vast economic inequality, and just you become aware of the privilege. And for me, I think it's easy to lose sight of that when you are staying in one place, especially in an affluent country like the United States. Whereas now that I'm traveling the world, I feel so much more passionate. I mean, all these international issues that I used to read about, now they're very personal because they involve my friends. I have friends that are personally affected. So I take it very personally. And, we write about these issues in our newsletter, and I feel like I care more. And it is exactly what you're saying. The more I centered myself, the more I was able to be selfless.
Yeah. And I think, like what you say, one of the things is also that the moment you experience other things, and I'm not saying that we could always feel the pain because we are not the ones in the situation, but the more you see, the more you can be more empathetic, or rather you have more gratitude for what you have,
Yes.
And it's really a perspective within yourself. So I've always kind of shy away from the notion of what is right or what is wrong. Ultimately, is how you can change yourself to see it for the better. So even when I say things like, hey, I might not think that protest is the most efficient way, but looking at it, that putting yourself in a power position to say, hey, I can make the change myself, slightly enriches yourself. And whether that opinion is right or wrong, there's no actual answer to it, right? It's how you take a situation to really help yourself progress and, look at the positive side of things, to be able to appreciate things better. And I think that is something that travel has brought a lot to my life, at least. Yeah,
Michael,
yes, please.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I wanted to carry on the topic about what you guys learned after so many years of travel on the road. So it's almost 5 years, right, so far? So apart from what you guys mentioned at the start, what are other things that you guys have thought about, have seen in the past 5 years that you think you'll be doing differently? And I guess I'm coming from this in an angle of like, what are some things that newbies might be worrying about a lot that actually doesn't matter, and you guys 5 years down the road feel like, hey, or maybe there are things that you would have done differently if,
I don't know that we would have done anything differently. I think the way it evolved turned out to be really great for us. I mean, what we learned about ourselves, what I learned about myself, and I think it's true for Brent, is that we're so much more flexible than we ever imagined. I mean, when you are living in the United States and you have, your job and your set hours and your routine that you do, you can get into a rut. But when you become a digital nomad, you're kind of forced to get out of that rut and be more flexible in terms of your living situation, or arriving in a new country and figuring out, exactly where I'm going to live, how I'm going to shop, what is the local culture like. And so we learned that about ourselves. I personally also learned I'm much more of an extrovert than I thought back in Seattle. I didn't have a huge circle of friends. It's harder to make friends in the United States because everybody's so busy and people have families and kids, and their careers take up a lot of their time. And then you live in a big city with a lot of traffic, and organizing get-togethers becomes something. Well, look at my calendar, and we'll pen it in, and okay, I know it's going to take an hour to drive across town. Oh, that's going to be a drag, but we'll do it. It just felt like it was hard. We had good friends in the States, but it felt like it was getting harder and harder to see them. So I just didn't feel like I had that big of a circle of friends. Then we became nomads, and I started meeting people who were living a lifestyle that matched my lifestyle. It was easy to do things with them. It was easy to hang out. And I started realizing how much I enjoyed doing that and acquiring those friends. And that first year, we're worried about being lonely. We're a little bit older than your average digital nomad, and we weren't sure what it was going to be like, how we were going to fit in. But we found this community of digital nomads. It's a wonderful group and accepting. And all of a sudden, we had these friends all around the world. And frankly, it's almost become too much these days. Everywhere we go, we're constantly meeting up with people. What did you learn?
Well, I think, to your question, Rex, that what has surprised us, I think, or what questions would people just starting out have? And I think, that was a big one we had, like Michael said, were we going to be lonely? And as Michael suggests, the opposite is true. But I feel like we've also learned that you sort of get what you give. It goes back to this question of life balance. I mean, a lot of people express frustration with loneliness, but for me personally, I have found that you have to make yourself available. I do think it is much easier to make friends as a nomad. On the other hand, it's harder to maintain them because your friends are constantly in flux. You're constantly on the move, and you may have, it's a little bit like that first year of college. If you go to university, that first couple of weeks, everybody's so receptive because everybody's been torn away from their social networks. Everybody wants, they're receptive to new friends. Well, that's sort of the status quo for nomading, that people are new in town. They're willing to make those relationships, and people, you spend every day or every other day with somebody for a month or 2 months. And I've had this experience where, literally I've spent 2 months really getting to know a person, really loving them and connecting with them. And then, I look at them on Facebook and it's like, oh, that's your last name. Like, I didn't even know their last name, and yet I feel like I have this great deep connection. But the more we do this, the more I have discovered that you really sort of have to cultivate that. You have to put yourself out there. You have to risk rejection. It's just like dating, I guess. And you can't don't win friends by thinking, well, I'm just going to be really, really witty and I'm going to be really smart and charming. It's like you win friends by being a good friend, by checking in on people and by being available. And Michael, when we were in Thailand, we had met some guy. We'd only seen him 2 or 3 times. He was a friend of a friend, but suddenly he was gone. He wasn't coming into co-working. And Michael checked on him, and it turned out he had gotten dengue fever and he was in the hospital, and he didn't have anybody to check on him. And I still think to this day, that impression, because Michael made the effort to reach out and say, are you okay? And then we check in on him and we keep checking in on him. And suddenly, when you're in a situation like that, when you're vulnerable and you are literally alone, he was traveling by himself, having somebody just make that small gesture, which took Michael, 10 seconds, but he thought to do it, which I guess is the point. And by doing that connection, it's not just a question of being witty at a cocktail party. It's like really caring about a person. And that's how you get people. I mean, it's not Machiavellian. I don't mean it like it's a transaction, but because the more you give, the more you get. But that is just a reality that we have discovered. And it feels to me, when we were in the United States, relationships felt more transactional because, when I'm a writer, people are networking and they think, how can this person help me in my career? And I don't want to over romanticize the nomad or the expat community, but those things seem to matter much less when you're away from, New York or Los Angeles or Seattle, the big corporate centers. And what matters is, do I like this person? Do I connect with, does this person care about me? Do I care about them? Is there a connection? And that's, it's weird to be in my 50s and really discovering something that I feel like I should have known all along, but I didn't really, not until we started doing this.
But you guys are from Seattle, right? Which has that famous Seattle freeze thingy.
Yes, that's funny. You've heard of it, and it's true. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. People are very reserved.
I guess what's interesting here when I hear you say this whole story is that because this idea of loneliness and finding friends, it's, as I observe, quite a big problem, right? Like, and it's not just about nomads traveling long term. Apparently, like anyone that's starting to travel or their first time doing solo travel, that's apparently a big consideration. They will always be thinking that, what if I feel lonely? What if I can't, make friends on the road? What are some ways that you guys start making friends at a new place? Is it more towards the nomading side of things, whereby you are going co-working or joining like these retreats or specific nomad events, or is it more of the travel side of things, whereby maybe you're going on a tour and then with the tour you find someone? What are some of the good methods that you guys have found that's easy to meet someone new?
Well, I think you touched on 2 of the best ways of doing it. Co-living and co-working would be the first part. Our first year, we did quite a bit of co-living, and we made great friends that we are still friends with to this day. As a matter of fact, we're meeting up with 3 of them in Italy in 2 weeks. We're going to be seeing them again.
2 more in Amsterdam.
2 more in Amsterdam. Yeah, that we made that first year. So I think co-living and co-work is an outstanding way to do that. Co-working and co-living will often have events where it's very easy to meet and socialize, and I think that's a really important part of it. But I also think I don't travel just to meet other Americans or Westerners or even digital nomads. I mean, one of the best parts of our travel has been meeting local people, and that's a different kettle of fish. That can happen by going to local coffee shops that maybe aren't necessarily digital nomad hotspots. I got to know a young lady in Novi Sad. I only discovered that coffee shop right towards the very end, but she and I really hit it off, and we spent a fair bit of time chatting. Here in Ohrid the other day, I was out for, I tend to go out for morning walks and take pictures, and I was sitting on a bench, and the bench over next to me had an older man with a dog, and I looked over and I said, oh my gosh, your dog's beautiful. It was a Malamute, which seems a little unusual here. Anyway, that led to a conversation where he was really curious about my being a digital nomad. He's a stained glass artist. He invited me to come to his studio, so I went over to his studio yesterday to see the work he's doing. And now he and his wife are going to have Brent and I up. This is the village Brent mentioned. They've got a small house in a rural village, so we're going to go up there and see that. And so we've made that local connection and that friend. It's a way of not being lonely. And I also think for the LGBTQ community, there's a great community of non-digital nomads waiting for you to plug into there. You go there, we often check out the gay rights group, because our being writers, we want to talk to them about what's like to live there and write a story, and we make friends that way. So I think that's a golden opportunity that not other communities necessarily have, that gay community to plug into.
You really have to. I mean, travel changes you in good ways. I think it forces you to sort of reinvent yourself and deal with your insecurities. And I think, I mean, we're lucky because we're a couple. We're never really alone because we're always together. There are other problems with traveling as a couple, but ultimately I think that's a good thing. And a lot of our single friends have talked about how it's hard to date because you meet somebody, and if you're dating a local person, your visa expires after 2 months and you move on. Or if you're dating a nomad, suddenly, well, do you go to the next country or city together? Does that sort of implies a seriousness that you may not be ready for? There are complications, but ultimately at the end of the day, you have to put yourself out there. And if you reach out to somebody and they react poorly, if they make you feel awkward or if they reject you, that's really their problem, not yours. If somebody is not receptive to your gesture, that really it says nothing about you. You have to maintain you have to get rid of your cynicism, the idea that everybody's a jerk and most people are selfish. You have to get over that, because honestly, I don't think that's the case. My experience is, well, there are, people that I don't connect with. Most of the local people we meet, and, most of the nomads, most of the expats are pretty generous people. They're pretty open, generous people. And you learn pretty quickly if you connect or not. And I look back over, as I said before, I look back over the first 50 years of my life, and I think I would have been a lot happier if I had been less suspicious about other people, if I'd been just willing to go with it and think that if it doesn't work, it just didn't work. It doesn't say I'm a bad person or that I'm unlovable or whatever those terrible things we tell ourselves. Just be open to it. That's what I think that's the biggest lesson of travel, that for it to work, you have to be open to whatever. You have to let things unfold. And because if you make plans, it's never going to go according to plan. But that's the beauty of life, that you will discover some unexpected new experience or some unexpected person. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times we've been on a tour or whatever, and all you have to do is just make the slightest gesture towards a person, just smile at them and say, "Oh, where are you from?" And then you're off and talking. And it's very rare that people just reject you and sit in silence. The thing that you fear, the awkward thing, rarely happens. And on the contrary, you have a pleasant afternoon, and sometimes you make a connection and you see them for dinner, and then you end up traveling with them, or who knows what. And it's a wonderful, magical thing.
Yeah, I can definitely resonate with a lot of the things you guys talking about. The one about, just saying hi first to other people and everything. I'm guilty of that. Like, I think I have to be more proactive in doing that, especially since I travel alone a lot. So, but sometimes I would just be like thinking, maybe it's awkward for me to say hi and whatever. And the thing is also that coming from, we talk about Seattle having the Seattle freeze, right? But then places like in most part of Asia, the personal space is very big compared to a lot of other countries. Like, it's extremely awkward for someone to stand very near another person in the elevator. You'll just be like, what the hell? Unless the elevator is like really crowded, it makes no sense to do that, right? So I guess we also kind of deploy our own upbringing or our own social thoughts into, external environments. And that's when you start feeling like, is it weird for me to like just, say hi to someone else? Like, that's awkward. But actually, in most cases, it's not the case. Like, they might be feeling the same way as well. But as long as someone starts the conversation, it actually can can go up to be something like a new friendship or a new relationship kind of thing, right? So, and I definitely understand the part about singles finding relationships in the nomadic scene. That's like the big problem among like all the singles in the nomadic community. I'm not sure if this is true, but I've heard, not really a stats, but I've heard that like, there are all these retreats whereby you get nomads coming to attend, and it's a bit of like co-living and maybe like masterminds or yoga retreats for like a week. And you often find a lot of singles going there, right? And you assume that having so many single male and females together, the chances of couples breeding from this kind of thing should be relatively high. But apparently it's not. Like, I think the thing about solo travelers is also that you have grown to be so independent of like your lifestyle, and you feel like I can do anything without caring about someone else. Suddenly, two independent travelers come together and they need to consider each other's plans. It starts to get a bit like,
You are absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right. Honestly, I kind of wish we have a few couple friends, but I wish we had more. We had dinner just 2 nights ago with a couple. They actually have a child, which is unusual. They have an 11-year-old boy. But I wish we had more couple friends. That is, but it's true. There are challenges, whatever your personal situation is. There are unique challenges.
For sure, for sure. And I want to take some time to dive into the whole LGBTQ and gay travel, because this is definitely an area that I think is underserved or undertouched in the whole travel scene. And I admittedly am like shamefully uneducated about this. Like I of course have a lot of friends in this space, but I always say, and this has been through my interview with other podcast guests, that I realize when you're not in the situation, you really don't understand. Like, even if we just talk about the simplest thing, like male travelers understanding what female travelers have to go through on the road.
Yeah,
I don't think we do, man. Like, I don't think we do. We have heard about it, but it's probably so much worse than what we assume it is, So I definitely want to hear like some thoughts from you guys. And because this is a bit of a sensitive topic, I'm going to apologize in advance if I say anything insensitive. And feel free to tell me to F off, but in a nice way, because this is a nice show. But yeah, I really would love to hear about your experiences traveling as gay couples, because I assume a lot of travelers who are gay will have this consideration about, like, we talked a bit about cultural differences, right? And some countries are not that open to that, right? When you guys plan your travels, do you take that into consideration? Like, which countries should I go to and which countries should we avoid? Or do you just go head in first?
It's changed over time. Our first year when we were looking at Bulgaria, I was concerned about that because I was like, well, Bulgaria is a former Eastern European country. It's, the Balkans. I haven't heard great things about it. So I had to do some research, and I was assuaged. I wasn't too worried about it. And then we got there and we started to understand certain things about our situation. And first is, I'm going to touch on the privilege. We are 2 white American males, and we are traveling in often, countries that tend to be more conservative on these issues are often, unfortunately, more economically disadvantaged. So we are coming in there with a lot of money compared to them, and we're spending it, and they have a vested interest in not caring about that we're a gay couple. So that's never been a problem for us. That isn't the sort of thing that we've had anybody not want to rent to us or anybody treat us badly because we're a gay couple. We actually coined a term to sort of describe it, and that is, we call it the weird foreigner rule. And just to be clear, we're the weird foreigners. And by that term means that when we arrive in a culture that's not our own, we're not part of that culture. We're outsiders. We're weird foreigners to those people. And they are therefore less invested in how we fit into their culture. Our being a gay couple there doesn't really change anything about their beliefs, their religion, anything like that. We're there, we're guests, we're spending money. So therefore, it's not as big a deal.
We are, as Michael said, we are white, sort of traditionally masculine men that would not necessarily read. We have a lot of privilege. And so it is, as Michael said, it's in their interest not to make a big deal. But at the same time, we do often think if there was a homophobic incident, and we've had lots of awkward moments, and we had to go to the authorities, are the authorities going to take our side, or are they going to take the side of the bigot, And that's concerning. There are certain places we wouldn't go. We wouldn't probably ever go to Saudi Arabia, but we have gone to more traditional countries. And everybody needs to decide these things for themselves. And some people are personally thinking, I'm just not going to go there. I'm not comfortable with that. Our experience has been, as Michael said, people are very hospitable and they treat us as individuals. It's also, our choice is, we see ourselves as visitors. We are guests. And so it is sort of in part our responsibility to conform to their mores, and then we're not going to sacrifice dignity. We're not going to violate our personal principles, but we're going to be, I don't want to use the word discreet, but we're not necessarily going to, there are certain things we wouldn't do. We're going to be respectful, just like when you're in a mosque, you're going to wear long pants, you're going to take off your hat, well, maybe we're not going to hold hands necessarily in certain neighborhoods. We've lived next to a lot of traditional families and Muslims. And I mean, first of all, it is a stereotype that all Muslims are anti-gay. We have many pro-gay Muslim friends that we've met, and we lived in, even Istanbul has many, many tolerant people. But the fact is, there's a healthy tension, I think. You have to be respectful, but at the same time, we ask gay friends when we visit these countries, well, what do you think about the idea? People say, don't come to Turkey. People say, boycott this place. And they say, they always say the same thing, which is, that's the worst thing you can do. Tell your friends to come here, be more visible, and then go back to your home country and tell people what things are like here and create international pressure on our government. That's what will help us, not, just ignoring our country completely.
There's two other things I want to add to that when a gay person is apprehensive. And I understand, anybody LGBTQ being apprehensive going into a country with a reputation, a situation they don't know. That is that much of the world places a huge value on hospitality and making you feel welcome and not judging you. They want you to enjoy their country. They're happy you're there. We see ourselves as guests, but they see us as guests too. And they really want to make us feel welcome and show us things. So there's that aspect of it. We also feel like by coming and not necessarily being, I don't know what assertively gay would be, but by not making a big deal out of the fact that we're gay, we let them get to know us. Like when we checked into our place here, the woman asked us, are you sleeping in one bed or are you going to be using the sofa couch? And we're like, just one bed. That's all we need. So she knows we're together, we're a couple. And now she's getting to know us as a person, as people coming over and saying, oh, can we get the wine opener, and chatting a little bit about, what we think of living here in Ohrid. And hopefully by doing that, we leave and, we're not going around the world trying to save anybody. That's not something we'd ever try to do. But we hope that we have a bit of an impact and sort of change the thinking a little bit just by being ourselves.
And what Michael said about hospitality is really true. And one thing I did not realize was how important hospitality is to Islam. And so here we are in these Muslim majority countries, and I feel so welcomed and so, sort of honored. I feel like an honored guest. And it really violated the stereotype I had in my mind. We all have stereotypes about different cultures. It's like, oh, this wasn't what I was expecting at all. A, that Muslims are all conservative, and B, that there's some sort of homophobic violence or something brewing right under the surface. That hasn't been our experience at all. I mean, in fact, my two favorite cities where I felt most welcome were Mexico City, Mexico, and Istanbul, Turkey. And even though both Mexico and Turkey have sort of traditional cultures, the cultures themselves, hospitality is such a big part of that I don't feel, and also I feel more safe in Turkey than in Mexico, but I also feel physically safe. There's just no crime in Istanbul, or very little crime in our experience.
I walked over Istanbul, and I mean, sometimes late at night, and never felt threatened in the least.
Now, it could be Michael and I are older, and I know how to maneuver a world that is more homophobic because I literally grew up that way. I knew that. And I know some of our younger gay friends, they might feel like, well, you're asking me to compromise who I am and visibility, and you're asking me to violate my principles, my personal principles. And I respect that. But that's just, for me, we can go to countries and I'll turn to Michael and I'll say, oh my gosh, this feels so familiar. It's like America was in 1985 or 1995 or 2006. This is exactly where they are. And it is true. I mean, I don't want to be culturally imperialistic. I don't want to apply Western standards to other cultures. But it is true that the way the cultures are with regard to gay issues, it feels very familiar, and I know how to behave. And so if you can make that mental leap, I mean, we have found in so many ways the world isn't anything to be afraid of. If you do your due diligence, if you are mindful of your environment, and if you make friends, the world is not the hostile place that I thought it was when we left home 5 years ago.
I mean, you do have to exercise common sense.
Yes.
When we lived in Tbilisi, Georgia, which unfortunately is a country that's struggling with a fair bit of homophobia at this point. We went to this special nightclub one night. Once a month, they have a gay night called Harum Nights at this big Bassiani nightclub, big underground nightclub. And there was security that you had to do. You had to pre-register before you went. They had security there. You had to have an ID to show them to get in. So we don't want to pretend like nothing bad can happen in the world. I mean, you do have to look at your situation. If you're going to be at a bar at 2 a.m, a gay nightclub, then you do want to be more aware of, have there been any homophobic things happening here? Do I want to leave this club by myself? I mean, I do know a friend who did get gay bashed in Tbilisi, unfortunately, one night as he was leaving. So, use common sense, and as Brent said, do your due diligence.
And what Michael said, our experience is not the same as the experience of a local gay person, because we've heard there is plenty of oppression in these countries, and we've heard it directly from people we now consider to be our friends in these countries. We just think the way to reduce that oppression is not to isolate those countries, but to go and, we have power, and unfortunately it's privilege, but we also have power as Westerners. And if gay tourists go to a country, conservative governments are going to be mindful of that, and then that will eventually trickle down to the locals on some level. This is what the locals tell us. But I do want to say that the experience for local people is usually very, very different. And we've heard horrifying stories, of oppression, and it breaks our heart.
And we try and use our privilege that we do have, not there on the ground, because you can't really affect change that way, other than, like I said, letting people get to know you. But we use our platform, we use our newsletter, and the column in LGBTQ Nation to write about these issues. So there are some Westerners who will breeze into Istanbul and have an awesome time and say, "Oh, I don't know why people say this is homophobic. Nothing happened to me at all. This is crazy. It's a great country." And as Brent said, that's not what's true for the locals. So we try and use our platform to talk about that and help in that way.
There's a lot of good points that you guys brought out there, and let me just try and summarize some of those that I picked up from. I think one is that, in terms of practical tips for someone who really wants to, visit some countries, one of the better ways, it seems, hearing from you guys, is to really speak to travelers who have visited the country, because the news tend to be all about the negative stuff. That's one thing.
Yeah,
so if you just hear from the news and you speak to other gay people who are only watching the news about it, then they are going to tell you shouldn't go there because there's going to be all these problems. And it's not always accurate, because like you guys say, sometimes the foreigners and the locals get very different treatment. So
yes,
going to a place who is not as gay friendly might not be as bad as what's being portrayed. So it's always good to really figure out what's the actual situation from different sources that have actually been onto the ground, like for example for you guys and stuff like that, right? So that's one point. I think the other point you were talking about, it's really that it's a balance between showing respect to the local culture while also not going to do something totally different from your own beliefs, right? Because I think there's always this balance between travelers or tourists going to a country and thinking that they can do anything there because they are spending money, versus just having a bit of respect for the local culture, because you are there as a guest and you're actually there to experience the local culture, right? And to be honest, there is no harm in trying to stay out of trouble. Why deliberately try and do something crazy if you can coexist or in peace and things like that, right? So it seems that you guys don't deliberately hold hands or whatever. It's a bit of the same issue, I think, happening in Bali right now, whereby they're complaining about digital nomads, not really digital nomads, but all travelers going to the beach and starts wearing bikinis or not wearing their shirt and walking all around the places, and the locals actually don't like it. I think a lot of times, a lot of the locals don't voice it out directly because well, you kind of feed their lifestyle, because they know that is what's bringing them the income, so they are polite about it. But it doesn't mean that they actually take it very well, right? Sometimes they might feel offended, but they're just not voicing it. Yeah, so I guess that is very important.
A lot of these tourist attractions, from our point of view, you have to remember, it's a church, it's a place of worship for the local people. So you have to treat it, you have to treat it like a place of worship. You have to, no matter, regardless of what your religious views are, you need to treat it with respect, because that is a place of respect. And you would not want them coming to someplace you respect back home and disrespecting your beliefs, whatever they are. And this feels like something we all should have learned when we were kids. But unfortunately, I think a lot of Westerners have so much entitlement, like you said, that they think, well, I'm rich, I'm spending my dollars, so therefore they need to accommodate me. And that's just not the way we see it. And if that's the way you approach travel, maybe you should just go to Cancun, maybe you should just go to Hawaii. And I don't know that you're ready to travel the world, because the joy of traveling the world, and once you do sort of make that mental leap and accept that people are not all not all Muslims are terrorists and not all religious people are stupid, and you start to see the beauty of different ways of living and traditional families. And and you realize, wow, I had a really limited perspective. I really was only seeing the world from my limited Western perspective, and I didn't see that there are other ways of being. And then your mind, that's, for me, that is much more important than lying on a beach, or having a drink on a beach. That changes you as a person, makes you a better person, I think.
I also like to talk a bit about this whole concept that you guys talk about, which is a lot more about representation, right? Like, there was this article that you guys talk about whether like going to a place who is like not as, more suppressed to the gay community is actually a show of support to the government, of which you guys always say that it's actually more of a representation that you go there and, by exposing yourself or showing that, hey, there are other perspectives in the world, that kind of helps to open up the perspective of the government or a lot of the locals. And I think this is not just true when it comes to like certain communities, but a lot of racial communities, or even one thing I've realized is that sometimes the locals are not aware of this because they are genuinely not aware of this, right? Like, they are not against it, but they just don't know, right? Like, I remember going to places like, I was in Bolivia and I was just traveling with another female who is European, right? And the travel agent was like really, we were not a couple or anything, but she was just so surprised to see an Asian guy with like a Eurasian girl together. And the assumption was that immediately that, hey, there's a guy and a girl is a couple. But it's really weird because it's an Asian guy and a Eurasian girl. So they're like, what the hell? And it's just genuinely like they didn't know about it. And if you go to places, I was talking to you guys about Kosovo. I remember going there and I'm like relatively unique there. Like, kids look at me and they're like, this is like some rare breed walking around the city, and they're taking photos of you and stuff like that, right? So this thing about representation, I do reckon that is very important. Let's talk a bit more about like what you guys do in this area to like, kind of understand more about the local scene, and how do you, without drawing like crazy attention to yourself, obviously, like how do you navigate around this issue?
Well, it is. I mean, what you said is absolutely true. I think one of the keys to happiness in life is to not assume the worst possible motives on the part of other people. Sort of begin with a place of respect, and maybe they're not a horrible person, and maybe they are uncomfortable or confused by two older men traveling together because they have no concept for being gay. That just doesn't exist in their mind. So people will often say, "Are you brothers or are you twins?" I don't think we look anything alike, but people will often say we're twins or we're brothers. It's like, well, no, we're two older men. And I mean, it is important to remember that. And it usually, sometimes it's coming from a place of hate or a place of intolerance, but sometimes it's coming from a place of ignorance. And I think it goes both ways, that I'm like, wow, I don't know anything about traditional Islamic cultures, and I don't know how you live. And oh, this is really interesting. It's not what I thought. So if I don't stereotype them, they're not going to stereotype me. And then you have that beautiful meeting of the minds. And it usually, as Michael said, we usually don't lead with the gay thing. We usually lead with, hi, I'm Michael, and hi, I'm Brent, and we're digital nomads, and we're visiting your country, and wow, we really love this restaurant, and we love this particular dish. And then, we'll friend them, and then they'll see our social media, and then they'll see that we're a couple, and then then, oh, that's what a gay person was. That's not what I thought at all. That's happened a number of times. And then they say, and it literally is no big deal. And I'd like to think that the next time they meet two men traveling together, or a gay person, or if they have a family member that is revealed to be gay, they're going to think, oh, I remember those two nice guys that I drove around Armenia for 3 days, or I remember, the people who lived in my Airbnb, and they weren't what I thought. And I think that we are changing the world for better. I mean, we're not doing this because we're like selfless missionaries or anything like that. But I think it is a natural byproduct of just putting yourself out there in a genuine kind of way and having that meeting of the minds.
I think you're going to have a lot more success in this sort of stuff if you open a door for people and offer to let them walk through it, then you open the door and try and push them through it. Nobody
well put.
Nobody wants to be shoved into something, but you open it, you walk away, they get curious, and they learn something about it. That's how I like to think about how we travel. I think the other way you learn to navigate these things is that you get to know the local people, and you hear from them what it's like to be, gay. Even if you don't want to go to Turkey because you don't want to support the homophobic government, well, then go to Turkey and do some research and look for the liberal areas and get in touch with the gay groups. I mean, we met several activists in Turkey and Tbilisi, and we learned about life there. And so that was a way we learned the situation and how to navigate it.
It can be a really beautiful thing, and I don't want to deny. I mean, there is a lot of hate and prejudice in the world, misunderstanding. To me, it's like the question: well, what's going to make that hate and anger and prejudice lessen? What's going to decrease that? And I don't want to put all the responsibility on the minorities. That sucks. But at the same time, It just feels like it seems to be working for us. We've had so many positive experiences as we travel the world, and I feel like my mind has changed and other people's minds have changed too. And it's partly meeting the local gay community. Although I will say, it even goes down to, when we were in Croatia, we lived in Croatia last winter, and we met, I don't know, 7 or 8 different gay people. And, we had to ask people, what's it like to be to be gay in Croatia? And some people were like, oh my God, it's horrible. It's so homophobic here. It's so repressive. And other people were like, oh, it's fine. My friends all know I'm gay. And it speaks to, you think like there's this one gay experience, and there isn't. It's the world is made up of 9 billion people, and there are 9 billion lived experiences. And it's nice to sort of have that. And again, my experience, even talking to 9 different people, my experience is so limited. I only lived in one town. But I do feel like, after a while, same thing in Syria, you'll go talk to a number of different points of view. You hear the gay Muslim point of view and the gay Croat point of view. And it's, there are similarities and there are differences. And I'm fascinated by all of this because, the older I get, the more I think that the world is complicated and there aren't really easy answers to any of these questions. We're all just struggling, fumbling our way through, trying to make sense of things.
Yeah, I definitely agree that the whole idea is that there are millions and billions of perspectives out there. And this goes back to what I always say about travel is that the world is bigger than the geographical aspect of it. You're not really there to see the geographical aspect. You are there to witness or learn about the unlimited perspectives out there from different people who see things differently, right? And when you put yourself in the shoe of the other picture, like you guys say, while you guys are setting or breaking stereotypes of like what people assume are gay people, and when you travel, you guys had your stereotype about like the Muslims or the Islamic people being broken as well, because on the news there's so many negative stuff about the racial thing. I don't think I even need to dive into it, but there are things like apparently in a lot of Middle Eastern culture, like you guys say, hospitality is huge. Like there is even this thing I've heard about whereby if someone knocks on your door and needs a place to stay or needs food, they will host you for three days or a whole week without anything in return. Yeah. So there are the good side of human beings that are waiting to be discovered if you choose to go out and really learn about it. But if you choose to just stay at home and look at the news, which is like the kind of almost the worst resource ever to look at, like to judge people, that's,
American culture is also, and I didn't realize this living in American culture, it's so individualistic. It's all about the individual and my perspective. And other cultures are really more about a group dynamic, looking at the whole and how do your actions affect other people. And in America, we have a real hard time with that. And I think, there are lots about America that I do like. And even this individualistic notion, there are advantages to that, that, people who have traditionally been oppressed and abused, that those points of views are valid. And I think there's a lot that America contributes to the world. But at the same time, and this really surprised me after 5 years of travel, that there's also something that other cultures can contribute to, and this idea of sort of a holistic community. And you have a responsibility to other people, that if they come to your door, you have to let them stay for 3 days. And I mean, the longer I'm away from America, the more I think, oh, America's crazy. You people are crazy. You don't get it. You are so far in one end of the spectrum that you've really missed the point of a lot of things. And you think that, material possessions are so important and your individual rights are so important, and you don't see yourself, you don't think about how your actions affect everybody around you, and all of us affects everybody else. And that feels like it was lost on me when I lived in America. And so that's been, in the end, I mean, maybe I'm a man without a home now because I don't fit in, and I'm not a true resident of many of the cultures we live in, but I don't really fit in America anymore. I really do feel, as Michael said earlier, we are now part of a community, sort of a community of nomads, and that's where we fit in. Literally, I think nomad is a great term for it because we don't have a home. I mean, we do have a home, but our home is constantly changing. But that's the community I identify with more than being an American or any of the countries we live in, obviously.
Okay. Yeah, though I guess the issue of like exposure and representation is really core to the whole idea of slowmad or like nomadic travel. You really want to discover in a deep sense on the local culture and how people look at it, and spending a extended period of time is always better, or like it just gives you more time to really dive deep compared to like very quick travel pace and stuff like that, right? So I do want to take some time to touch on this interesting story you guys had, which is the trip to Armenia, right? Because you guys had this driver who's supposed to take you guys around, and then you guys were considering whether to say to disclose that you were gay, right? And then this article on your blog was really interesting because I looked at it throughout this experience, or maybe give us like, of course, a quick overview on what was the story. But I guess what's the most important thing is what was the overall takeaway from the whole episode?
Well, Michael, we hired a driver, two friends, and Michael and myself were going to drive around Armenia, which is a very poor traditional country. And somebody recommended a driver, and Michael said, "Well, we should tell him we're gay." And I'm like, "Why would we tell him we're gay? He's our driver. That'll just be awkward." And he was recommended. I want to go with this. And then literally, once we got in the car, he fixated on Michael, and he kept asking Michael, "So, Michael, are you married? What do you mean? You're in your 50s, and are you interested? Do you have a wife?" And he just didn't get it, and he ignored me, and it was just so ironic because I've been the one like, "No, let's not tell him we're gay." And Michael's like, "I want to come out," and I'm saying, "No, stay in the closet." And yet he's just fixated on Michael.
Well, I wanted to come out beforehand,
right,
in case he did have a problem. And Brent's not exaggerating. I happened to sit in the front seat while our Brent and our two other friends were in the back seat. And I closed the door, and he turned and looked at me, and he said, "So are you married?" I mean, the first thing he said, it was just, and I like literally turned around and looked at Brent. I think that was a really interesting experience because I think that's kind of a nexus, a collision of some of the things that we're talking about. Because on one hand, I did not want to end up in a situation with a homophobic driver who was going to be acting really uncomfortable when he cued into the fact that we were gay. So that's the aspect of doing your due diligence and not putting yourself in a bad situation. On the other hand, by doing it the way we wound up doing it, and not forcing the issue right away, he wound up spending 3 days with us and getting to sort of just see us as people instead of, if I had said, "By the way, we're a gay couple," well, then that's the stamp that would have been on our head when he met us, is, "Oh, these guys are the gay couple." And as a result, everything went fine. I mean, other than him continuing to ask me questions and me making Brent ride in the front seat, so I wouldn't have to answer any more of these questions. But when we got back, he was a really nice guy, and we had a really good trip with him. And we were considering doing another trip that we wanted to go on. And so I sent him a message, and Brent agreed with me this time. I said, "We're interested in doing this trip. By the way, we just want to make it clear, that it's just gonna be the trip. We are a couple. I just want to make sure that that's not an issue." And he wrote back and he said, "My friends, we will go and see the wonderful country of Tbilisi, and we will have a great time."
It's not an issue at all.
Yeah, it wasn't an issue at all. So I can't see in his mind. I can't know how he really felt. Maybe all he cared about was, "My friend, you're going to be paying me money, and that's what I care about." Or maybe he was fine with it from the beginning. He was like, he had gay friends and he didn't care. Or maybe it was somewhere between, and he got to know us, and we were going to be paying him, but we changed his mind a little bit. Who knows? But it wound up being a good situation. And going forward for us, it made me kind of approach it less from the feeling like, "Oh, I need to tell them up front that we're a gay couple," and more, leading with just, here we are as people.
Well, it was interesting. That was very generous of you, Michael. You could totally say, "I told you so," because you were right and I was wrong. But it was, because I was thinking, well, we're going to be 3 days in a car with this guy. How often is the gay thing going to come up anyway? We're going to be sharing a hotel room. I mean, just the two of us. But other than that, why would this ever come up? But of course, these were two of our really good friends, and our relationship and our being a couple came up constantly. And I was like, then I was really self-conscious about
talking in the backseat.
Because we're with friends, we're just shooting the breeze, and we're constantly talking about this. And one of our friends was queer too, and I guess that's going back to Western privilege. I don't, you think, well, how often does the gay thing come up anyway? Well, it comes up a lot when you're really comfortable when you're with comfortable friends. But that whole thing was very instructive and very interesting.
The whole episode was very interesting because I can totally see the thought process between the two contrasting perspectives that both of you had. And to be honest, both are relevant. Like, without hindsight, I can totally see why Michael say that, "Hey, I just want to make sure that this is happening so the trip will go smoothly, and if there's anything, we can sort it out at first." The other perspective is that why say this to other people, and that might just put a stamp of stereotypical stuff from the driver to us in the first place. Right. So both perspectives seems to make sense without the experience going through, right? But is there, and I'm not sure if this is even like a conclusive conclusion, right? And it could also be a result of the whole process that went well, that you guys came to a conclusion, hey, it might be better to have said it in front because it meant nothing, right? But would you guys, so if something like that happens again, like you want to hire a driver again for like a long trip where you'll be spending time with the driver throughout, will you guys choose to let the driver know first in advance?
We generally haven't, but it's interesting. I think the tension between the two of us, Michael is sort of more, I think he's more willing to be forthright. And I'm like, it's not really an issue. But I think that tension actually serves us well. I'm sort of a check on Michael, but he's sort of a push on me. He sort of pushes me to maybe do things, be more open than I would otherwise be. And I'm like, well, let's be a little more discreet in this situation.
Well, we haven't hired another driver for an extended period of time.
For 3 days, yeah.
For 3 days. I do think, I mean, that probably will come up again. And I do think if we're in a country that maybe there is more traditional, I don't know that I'll necessarily message them right away and say, hey, we're a gay couple. I think I might do some sleuthing. I might look at reviews. I might check social media, to see what I can learn about this person. But I guess I still wouldn't want to drive through rural Turkey for 7 days with somebody who we're going to be sharing, not hotel rooms, but hotels with, and that we're going to be spending a lot of time with.
You're fairly vulnerable.
Yeah. And it's not even the vulnerable part. I just don't want it to be uncomfortable and awkward for anybody. I don't want to feel like he's like doesn't want to talk to us, because there have been, very, very short briefs, and not necessarily about the gay stuff, but being American in certain countries where people, when they have tumbled onto the fact that we're American, a wall has gone up. Right. And it's like, oh, I'm glad this is just a 5-minute interaction, not a 5-day interaction, because this would be really uncomfortable. So I think we would take it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
So basically it's the same, like do the discretion, just make like the smart choice at the time, and then after that go by a gut feel and just adapt to the situation, right?
It's interesting how we really have come to rely on gut feelings. And maybe we've just been lucky, because we haven't had a lot of negative experiences by relying. And again, we have the benefit of two different guts. I'm more cautious, and Michael is maybe a little more of a risk taker. So we end up in a pretty good place. But we had the epiphany once. It's like, if you're in a neighborhood that looks dodgy, if there are children playing, you're probably okay, and because if parents are willing to let their kids play, then it's probably a safe neighborhood. And if there aren't children playing and it looks like there are families, well, that's a bellwether of something else. It's like, okay, well, maybe we should not be here at night, or depending on, and we always, when we get to a country, well, first of all, we do the due diligence beforehand. If we're staying in a hotel, we'll ask at the front desk, is there anything we should be aware of? Are there any, cons? Have there been pickpockets, anything like that? Or we'll ask the host if we're staying, at an Airbnb or something like that. Just, we're sort of absorbing information. And then ultimately, though, you are relying on your gut. And I think it is like anything, the more you use a muscle or an intuition, the better it becomes. Maybe I'm fooling myself. Maybe we've just been lucky, but it feels like, we've had circumstances. We met a guy in Istanbul and became friends, and he had us over for tea, and then he took us to his mom back in his hometown. And in retrospect, I think, well, was that a risk? No, it wasn't a risk at all, because I totally trusted him. I had a sense of him. This guy that Michael met in the park, he had coffee with him. He met him, and then he had coffee with him. It's like, is it a risk to go with him 40 kilometers to his village? Well, no, it isn't, because I trust Michael, and we have developed sort of a keen sense. And I often think, if this is a con, or if they're setting us up, it's like the longest con in history. It's like, I have to game it through. What's their end game? Or why would they possibly go through all these? And then it's informed by the fact that most of our experiences are really positive. Most of our experiences are that, my sense of the world is, most people are not scary people who are trying to rip me off. Most people are pretty darn cool, who are curious about me, and I'm curious about them.
Yeah, but the common sense comes back. I mean, this fellow I met in the park with the dog the other day, if he had said, hey, I'm driving back to my village 40 kilometers away, do you want to come? I would have been like, that feels a little weird to just be me making this offer, and that I would have declined that. But instead we talked, and then we exchanged the messages on social media. I went to a studio. So be adventurous, but don't be stupid.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think for travel, it's always this balance between, and it's always a balance that I kind of struggle with sometimes, between like, you want to open up to others, so there is always like new experiences, and you can really, it's only when you open up that you can truly really experience, some unique culture or stuff like that. But you also need to be cautious about it. Like, you don't go and do like some crazy stupid stuff, right? And it's always that, and I guess it's always good when you are traveling in a couple, right? There's at least always a companion with you. But for a solo traveler, definitely, I would say I'm always on the more cautious side of things, which I know that kind of closes me off to some experiences. But I guess it's a very personal experience, and everyone's gut is like different, like you say, right?
Yeah.
So that is important.
And bad things can happen. I mean, and when you're by yourself and you don't have anybody there, knowing when you're coming home, you are more vulnerable. So I think it's okay to err on the side of caution.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to close off, let's go with a few quick fire questions for you guys. And it's pretty simple questions, but you guys might have different answers. So you guys each of you can give your set of answers. So the first one is, what's your favorite travel destination so far?
I can't answer that question. That's like somebody having 12 kids and saying, pick your favorite child.
My favorite cities are Mexico City and Istanbul, Turkey. But I loved Vietnam. I loved so many places. I really like the Balkans. I really like Romania. I was pleasantly surprised by how beautiful it is.
I haven't gotten him to Australia yet, but I absolutely love Sydney. Sydney's one of my favorite places. And we lived in a small mountain town in Switzerland called Gramentz, and I had a magical, amazing month there.
We probably agree that our favorite country is probably Italy.
Yeah, we love Italy.
Oh, really? Okay.
It's a cliche, but Italy's amazing.
Is it the food, the culture, or what's the?
It's all of it. It's the fact that it's geographically so different. I mean, it stretches all the way up to the top, touches up against Switzerland by Lake Como, and then you go all the way down deep into the Mediterranean, and you've got mountains and coasts, and the food is fantastic. And I love the people. I think the people in Italy are. It's not necessarily that they're exuberant towards you. I mean, they're very welcoming, but the Italians have a joy of life just amongst themselves that I really like.
They do my two favorite things well, which is talking and eating and cooking. Talking and cooking.
Gotcha.
They do them both very, very well.
Okay. The next question is, apart from your laptop and your mobile phone, what are 3 of the most useful items in your travel bag?
Well, no one's ever asked us that before.
Well, it's funny. I'm starting, we have like a couple of kitchen utensils, like a carrot peeler. That's like most Airbnbs don't have a carrot peeler, or a decent spatula, stuff like that. I know it sounds weird, but your life is so much better. When we get into a new town, we'll often immediately buy new pillows and a blender. If we're staying somewhere for 3 months, we'll buy new pillows and a blender, and then we just leave them when we leave. So, but that's not really in our bag. The great beauty of our life is there isn't anything that we couldn't lose except for our laptops and our passports and sort of recover in a week.
You need really good shoes.
You're going
to be walking a lot, so you need really good shoes.
A rain jacket.
I know this is part of the phone, but for me, the camera on my phone is really important because I document where we go and how I see the world. So it's not so much, I don't care about the phone for the social media aspect and all of that, but for me, the taking pictures.
Kindle is great, access to every book ever written.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny, things are so much less important.
Yeah, our backpacks, having a really good, decent backpack that's sturdy, and that can carry what you need. So shoes, my camera, and a good backpack.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the essential stuff basically. So you guys are really minimalistic travelers. Cool.
We are terrible.
That's actually a good thing. That's actually a good thing. And lastly, I guess each of you can answer one of these questions because I think we spoke about the digital nomad aspect and we spoke about gay travel, right? So for each of this aspect, what do you think is the single most important tip for anyone wanting to start a digital nomad life or go traveling as a gay?
Well, for digital nomad life, it's the world's not a scary place. I mean, that would be my big piece of advice to you. Just get out there and start seeing it, and you're going to find it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and I mean, if you are, I have been surprised by how inexpensive if you are coming from a Western culture, you can live very inexpensively, which gives you incredible flexibility and incredible freedom. But the world's not a scary place, and people are so much more hospitable than either of us expected. Those are the two big surprises.
And I think that overlaps with the gay part too. I mean, I know I've talked to a lot of gay people who are just afraid of certain parts of the world, and I think it's because of what we touched on earlier about the media. They think that a couple actions that happened in Turkey represent the entire country, and I just don't think that's true. And I think it's a shame to let those things blind you to all the good parts.
It is sort of delightful, the gay experience. Everybody's so different, cultures are so different all over the world. But the gay experience, it is sort of similar, everybody, and it's nice to be in an unfamiliar culture and meet a gay guy and know exactly what he's going through, especially since we're older, because I often literally went through the same thing when I was a kid. And that's, I love anything that makes you feel like more connected, and people are ultimately more the same than we are different, but the differences are really interesting.
It's a good one to know.
Yeah, that's you guys threw a lot of very great lines this thing. I think obviously you guys are writers. So thank you, Brent and Michael, for coming on today. And I think you guys have a lot of resources on both the digital nomad lifestyle and GTQ travel, right? Where can people find you guys in terms of the website, the newsletter, the podcast?
The newsletter is Brent and Michael are going places. So Google Brent and Michael are going places and Substack, and that will take you to our Substack newsletter. And that's sort of the home of everything else. We're also on Facebook and Twitter, and used to be on Instagram, not on Instagram so much. Did I forget anything?
No, I think that's it. Yeah. Feel free to subscribe, and you can decide pretty quickly if if you like what we write. But we write, we're informational, not aspirational. We write about our real life experiences, but we also try to have a bigger, broader perspective about travel in general and sort of lessons we've learned along the way.
And we're really easy to get in touch with. So if you've got a question, people email us constantly or message us, on Instagram and Facebook, and we love talking with people. So don't be shy about asking questions.
Okay, cool. I'll drop the links below. And yeah, I think one of the most unique aspects about your writing for me when I looked at it is that it always covers like a macro, broader overview topic of something in the world. I don't think I'm expressing that correctly, but it's just different from the typical like travel blog kind of thing. It has a deeper thoughts onto it on like wider issues in the world. So that was really interesting. I think that's very reflected in the conversation we had in this episode. It's like we dive into topics that are way more like high level compared to like just very zoomed in. Okay, cool. Thank you guys.
Max. That was very nice to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming on today, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
That sounds great. Thanks.
Absolutely.